Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome uh, to this event organized by GIDR. I would like to welcome Professor Kaushik Basu, Professor Pravin, Professor Visaria, Professor R. and to all my dear friends of GIDR. It's a great pleasure to have you all in this 8th Pravin Visaria Memorial Lecture. This lecture, as you all know, that this has been organized by GIDR, and Professor Kaushik Basu, who has been a world-renowned economist, have agreed and consented to grace this occasion. The topic of the lecture is the changing nature of the global economy and labor markets. What may the future hold? Now, may I request Professor R. to welcome and inaugurate the session and speak a few words about Pravin Visaria Memorial Lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Janna. Very, very warm and a cordial welcome to all of you. On behalf of the governing body of GIDR, the faculty and the staff, it's really a great pleasure to have all of you this evening to listen to Professor Kaushik Basu, who is going to deliver the 8th Professor Pravin Visaria Memorial Lecture. Pravin Visaria Memorial Lecture has been one of the important events for GIDR. The bio sketch of Professor Visaria is with all of you. But I would like to point out that he had been a very renowned economist demographer. He would stress that very often because there are demographers from different disciplines, and it's important that we understand the nuances of the demographics from the economist perspective. He has been a very fine human being, and working with him as I did from '87 for a very long time, and my former colleague Rita Shah is also here, who both of us joined together in the evening of September '87. It has been in different capacities. We had occasions to work with him. Almost on all occasions, it has been a very learning curve, I would say. And as all learnings, those days, working together is not very easy. That's because he has been a very tough taskmaster. He is known to be a very tough taskmaster. A stickler to rules and for facts, he would often stress that you should not say anything beyond what the data say. I remember one of his titles in the EPW, that an article that he had published. It ends with, "What do the data tell us?" So it's it's an article along with Professor B.S. Manhas. So that is an axiom, I would say, that he followed, and he also used it as a yardstick for others to measure. And he had been very, at the same time, a very proficient policymaker and contributor to the policy. Not just in the policy sense of the term, but even in terms of the data that has been collected with his years of association with the National Sample Survey Organization. Both as a member first and then later as a chairperson. The planning for data is the one which all of us like those days, because it's not just the data collection per se, but to plan for the several rounds of NSSO, defining each and every variable that goes into the questionnaire and the subsequent tabulation plans. So we had very lively discussions on many occasions. He had been on different committees, he had been with the World Bank, all this had been also written. Obviously, he would formulate much of the arguments with hard facts. As I said, he was stickler to the data sets. And in fact, the edifice that he built was on those kind of hard facts and data. So that's a lesson that all of us learned, and it's very important that the youngsters also learn from now. GIDR then very proudly grew to be an empirical research institute. And for that, we owe a great deal and in great measure to Professor Pravin Visaria. The experience of working with him stands with us in good stead, and that's very important. On the 8th memorial lecture, it's our great fortune to have Professor Kaushik Basu, a very eminent economist, who had very kindly agreed to deliver this lecture. While I would request Professor Parik to introduce the speaker of the evening and chair the session, it gives me a great pleasure to invite Professor Parik for this evening. He is currently the president of GIDR. He was a former member of Planning Commission, Government of India, and he is currently the chairman of GIDR, a research institution in Delhi. He was a founding director. Now it has been redesignated as Vice Chancellor of the GIDR Mumbai, and has been a very renowned researcher in his own right, especially on energy economics. The President of India has honored him with a Padma Bhushan. In fact, Professor Basu has also been honored with Padma Bhushan. So we have 2 Padma Bhushans amongst us today. Professor Parik has a Doctor of Science in Civil Engineering and a Master's degree in Economics from MIT. He has been a Professor of Economics since '67. In the past, he has been on very many corporations as well as on companies' boards, notably of India Petrochemicals Limited, the Life Insurance Corporation, and the State Bank of India. Importantly, he has been honored as the Distinguished and Illustrious Alumni of the Decade by MIT, and in 2007, and in the same year, IIT Kharagpur also honored him as a Distinguished Alumnus. We are very thankful, sir, for kindly agreeing to chair this evening session. May I request you to kindly introduce Professor Basu and conduct the proceedings. Professor Parik.
Friends, I'm delighted to be here today, simply because I've known Pravin Visaria for many, many years, and that I had admired his work and the scholarship that he displayed, the meticulous understanding of data, and as Partha said, let the data speak and nothing more than that. And that kind of a discipline to keep is extremely important, and that I think was something that one admired greatly in Pravin Bhai. And it's passing away at a very young age, actually 63, is a great loss to the country, but nonetheless it's something nobody can do anything about, so I think we have to accept it, and I think this memorial lecture in his memory is at least a fitting tribute that GIDR is paying to it. Today's speaker, Kaushik Basu, is also someone I have known for many, many years, admired him, and his lucidity in explaining complex things is certainly is something that one always admires and wonders how is he able to bring really complex things up front to everybody's understanding. And that is certainly a great characteristic that I think you're all waiting for a treat that you will see at the end of the day today, his lecture today. He's a professor of economics and Karl Marx professor. It's not Marx, it's M-A-R-K-S. And not K-R-L, C-A-R-L, Karl Marx. Professor of International Studies and Politics, because even though he's a Bengali economist, he's not really wedded to the Marxian doctrine as many of them are. And he's currently president of the International Economic Association, serving a term from 2017 to 2020. He was formerly senior vice president and chief economist of the World Bank in 2012 to 16. And prior to that, he was the chief economic advisor to Indian government in 2009 to 2012. Kaushik Basu received his PhD in MSc Economics from the London School of Economics and BA Honours from St. Stephen's College in Delhi. He has received honorary doctorates from several institutions and universities, including IIT Bombay, Fordham University of New York, and the University of Bath, UK. Kaushik Basu has published widely in the areas of development economics, industrial organization, game theory, and welfare economics. His two most recent books are An Economist in the Real World, The Art of Policy Making in India, MIT Press and Penguin Random House, 2015, and The Republic of Beliefs, A New Approach to Law and Economics, Princeton University Press, 2018. You can just see that it covers wide areas, brings a multidisciplinary perspective and focus on his work, and that's what makes it even particularly interesting. His books have been translated to several languages, including Chinese, Spanish, Italian, Russian, and French. Chinese and Russian you can understand, they want to know what the Indians are thinking of. But Professor Basu has contributed popular articles to magazines and newspapers such as the New York Times, Scientific American, India Today, Business Standard, and BBC News Online. In May 2008, he was awarded one of India's third highest civilian awards, the Padma Bhushan, by the President of India. Kaushik Basu has held visiting positions at the Institute of Advanced Studies, Princeton, London School of Economics, Harvard University, Princeton University, and MIT. He was Professor of Economics at the Delhi School of Economics, where in 1992 he founded the Center for Development Economics and was its first executive director. He is also a founding member of the Madras School of Economics. So somewhere the Marxian tradition comes in. Okay. I'm looking and anxious to hear Professor Kaushik.
Professor Kirit Parekh, Professor Parthasarathy, thank you very much, Leela Visaria, for the invitation, and Kirit for the very generous introduction. But I've known Kirit for years, from his time in Austria to later in Mumbai. And I have to say, maybe because of 2 virtually frozen years, I can't tell you how much pleasure I feel being here on this special occasion and in person. And yes, if you just show me also how to, yes. But while this is happening, I should just say, I may as well tell you the trivial thing while this is being adjusted. The Karl Marx, which is the title of my chair, was a New York investor who invested money in Russia. In fact, before the other Karl Marx made it a communist country, this particular Karl Marx invested money and earned a lot there and gave Cornell an endowment, and it's in memory of that Karl Marx that the chair was instituted. Yes, that's good. Yeah. It's a very special occasion for me. Giving the that microphone, if you switch off, it won't react. Giving the Pravin Visaria lecture is particularly an honor for me. I initially thought that Pravin's big contribution was as a demographer and as an economist will I have much to say, but actually he saved the situation because some of his early works, and as what Partha mentioned just now, rooted completely in data and analyzing, gave some of India's most important findings on discrimination against the girl child, some of the most path-breaking work, missing girls, malnutrition among girls, some of the most important work done with Ansley Cole, the very famous Ansley Cole, and that spilled over into economics in a very big way. Subsequent work by Amartya Sen picks on that and then extends it, and it became a very big sort of accelerator for work in economics, which was Pravin's originally. So thank you very much for the honor. I actually first met Pravin and also Leela through my wife, who is a demographer, but subsequently got to know their work. Before I go on, I should also tell you that quite apart from Pravin's remarkable intellectual scholarship and contribution, he was also a very fine human being. And I must say that I am an academic, but for me, that fine human being, a person with certain values, is such an important quality that it's the twin measure of intellectual achievement with those moral qualities that makes it very special, and I'm deeply honored to be giving this lecture. The world economy is going through a very difficult phase. All over, you look around the world, there's strains of different kinds that are taking place. The economy itself, from inflation to unemployment across the world. United States is teetering on the brink of a proper stagflation. And virtually look at any country and you will see this. Where does it come from? What is happening? I believe that for the world, today is a point which is one of the riskiest transitions that we are going through. And we need to bring our minds together to analyze what's happening in the world, why are we in this crisis. The roots of this are not difficult to see. I will just now put up a picture and you will see this. The digital revolution, which started 40, 50 years ago. Artificial intelligence coming in, displacing labor, making us much more productive. It is a very rapid technological advance, which at one level is of course the good news, because a technological advance expands the potential of the economy. You can create more. But when rapid technological advance takes place, that begins to change the rules of the game. And I will illustrate this with the Industrial Revolution, that what is an opportunity is also a very, very big risk, and the world is probably facing that. So over the last 40, 50 years, the advance in digital technology was causing a strain, but on top of that, over the last 2 years, there came, of course, COVID-19, which turned things upside down. Supply chains were being disrupted, and over the last couple of months, it's the Ukraine war, which has thrown yet another spanner into the generally workings of the economy. The COVID-19 has a very interesting connection with the digital revolution. The digital revolution has made it much easier for us to work with the technology which was earlier not there, the digital technology. But we know from historical examples that when a new technology comes, it takes very long for people to master that technology and begin to use that technology, so the technology can be there. But you will get 30, 40 years before people learn to use it. Just look back at what the COVID-19 did with the digital technology. It taught us how to use it in a way that we could not have imagined. This is an old theory of Kenneth Arrow, learning by doing. Arrow wrote that some of the most important forms of knowledge comes from hands-on work, learning by doing something. Normally, the digital technology would have taken us several decades to master, but over the last 2 years, we can sit in our home and conduct meetings. We can be on a vacation and give a lecture. Meetings, people from all over the world poured in from a meeting, all happening digitally. And I have to say, initially I was completely fumbling doing all that, but gradually I've got used to it. So the digital technology has seeped into our society much more rapidly because of the COVID-19 crisis, and this indeed is causing a strain which we had not anticipated. Historical analog, I want to give one and then move on. The Industrial Revolution, roughly from 1750 to 1860, 1870. New machines coming in, workers who would earlier be using weaving techniques being displaced by machines, and basically labor-saving technology growing in leaps and bounds from 1740, 1750, over a 100-year period, made the world much richer. And if you look at growth figures, it's quite striking that before the Industrial Revolution, the world economy used to grow at roughly 0.3% per annum. So the GDP growth, the world GDP was growing at 0.3% up to about 1820. This is calculation by Angus Madison. After the Industrial Revolution, the world growth rate became roughly 2.1%. So from 0.3% to 2.1%. So the world was growing 7 times faster after the Industrial Revolution. But it did not have to happen that way. There were dangers during the Industrial Revolution that we forget now because we came out of it successful. In the early days of the Industrial Revolution, we hear stories of skies darkened by soot and smoke and cloud. Children as young as 8 years, 10 years old, struggling away, working 10 hours, 12 hours a day, destroying their human capital, their health, their capacity to grow up into mature adults who will be able to do. All these were part of the Industrial Revolution. In fact, in early days, no, let me not waste time on, I was going to show you a PowerPoint, but I'll keep the PowerPoint for a bit later. In the early days, that seemed like a norm, but it could have been destructive for the world. 2 things happened during the Industrial Revolution, which I think changed the world for the better, and we got advantage of the new technology. Number 1, labor regulations. Labor regulations are controversial. You can overdo it, you can underdo it, but you have to have some regulation. There are very lovely documents in the British during the Industrial Revolution. Industrialists arguing that children, 8 years, 10 years old, working for 10 hours a day, builds character. So we want their character to be built. They would not build their own children's character by making them work for 8, 10 hours a day, but other people's children should work and build up their character. But these were not evil people. That was the thinking of the time, that children should work that hard. That changed, starting with Sir Robert Peel's Act, that children need a time to acquire education, get better health, and later on they will join the labor force. Think of another policy change that took place. Income tax comes in for the first time in 1842. It was considered shocking. How can the government take away a part of the income that you've generated? But you can't run a government, you can't provide minimum public services without that. Today it is a norm, we don't think of it as a radical move. I feel we are at a juncture today where people have to go out of the box thinking about policies that we need because of the crisis in the world economy, caused by this time a very different kind of technological advance, but a technological advance all the same. There is one more thing that happened during the Industrial Revolution that I don't see too many people talk about, which is innovative thinking. So it's not just policy, but it is innovative research. If you think of the Industrial Revolution's 100 years, that coincides roughly with some of the greatest works of economics. 1776 for economics is a very, very special year. It's Adam Smith's fundamental book being published in 1776. 1874 is a very special year for economics because it is Leon Walras's book that comes out. Over this roughly 100 years and coinciding with the Industrial Revolution, comes out important pieces of work by George Stuart Mill, David Ricardo, Stanley Jevons, Karl Marx, people who are thinking, contributing, trying to understand the economy. And this is fundamental thought, which is not just doing mathematics or statistics, but it is staring at the world and trying to understand what's happening. Think of Adam Smith's deep insight. The fact that my clothes get stitched by a tailor who has no interest in dressing me up, but the tailor stitches it. Food gets grown by farmers which I eat. How do all these things happen, which gives us the capacity to live life? Is it some mysterious hand guiding us? Adam Smith reached the conclusion, no. It is the hand of the market. Individuals striving, the tailor has no interest in clothing me, but has an interest in earning some money to feed the tailor's family. The farmer has no interest in feeding me, but wants to sell things to make food for oneself. It's all these desires put together, created a system. This was Adam Smith in 1776. Adam Smith did not have the wherewithal to write it down formally, but there you needed a mathematician. Leon Walras comes along and says that Adam Smith's beautiful system, I can write it down in the form of equations and a general equilibrium system. That's in 1874. Very interestingly, as a footnote, let me get myself water. Economics is such a fascinating mishmash between politics, sociology, and mathematics. Walras described the system, but that the equilibrium that Adam Smith was describing, that the equilibrium will exist, Walras could not prove. That needed a mathematical input which Walras did not have. Almost 75, 80 years ago, a genius mathematical economist, John Nash, some of you may have heard his name, he lost his mind to schizophrenia from the age of 30. So all his contributions took place over a 5-year period. He provided a theorem which allowed general equilibrium system to be written up. So all this dramatic thinking in economics takes place roughly coinciding with the Industrial Revolution, and at the end of it we come out better off. I will touch on some of those things now, but let me go ahead and move to current times. Where will we go? What will happen in the current crisis that the world is facing? It's also a political crisis, I must point out. Politics has become polarized across the world. The little bit of working together you need, the trust you need among human beings, which is so crucial for the world to do well, that's got fractured. And I do believe that economists love to keep economics as a clean discipline. You write down the statistical models, the mathematical models, and you get economic analysis. But economics is situated in politics, in society. All those things matter, and we need to understand that. But let me come to present times. My hope is that though it is a crisis, it is an existential crisis of the world, we will come out of it. And like in the Industrial Revolution, at the end of the turmoil, hopefully, we will be growing even faster than we are growing now. So the rough growth rate before the crisis, the world growth rate is roughly 3% per annum. The global GDP grows roughly at 3% per annum. If we have the experience similar to the Industrial Revolution, after 40, 50 years, that 3% could be 21% per annum GDP growing. At first thought, how is that possible? I mean, can the world survive? That many more cars being made, those many more houses, aeroplanes, fancy boats, the world environmentally cannot be sustained. But to that there is an important footnote that must be pointed out. People very often think of GDP, the national income of a country, as more cars, more houses, more of all the material goods. But GDP is not that at all, and this is not anything special. I'm saying if you think of the way the national income is written out, anything that is of value is a part of national income. So, if human health is improving in leaps and bounds, that is GDP. You don't have to have more cars. You don't have to have more aeroplanes. If our health is becoming vastly better, that valuation increase is causing the GDP to increase. If our life expectancy is increasing in leaps and bounds, that's an increase in GDP, and that would be, in fact, in the standard way of calculation of GDP that will come in. If we are consuming things which are not destructive to nature, we are consuming better music, better literature, better arts, that's also a part of GDP. So if we come out of this crisis into a world which is growing much more rapidly, my hope is it will be a GDP which will be composed very, very differently. And that can indeed be growing very fast, and that will be a sustainable world that we are coming into. But all this needs policies which are out of the box thinking, like happened during the Industrial Revolution, and also thinking about the economy, which has to be out of the box thinking. But let me jump to the present time with one particular figure, and if I can move it right. This is a little table that captures, actually I won't even, the picture is easier to look at, so this is going to tell you what I'm going to show you just now. This captures what's beneath the surface, the crisis that is taking place. If you take the world's, any country's GDP, the national income, the share of that goes to workers as worker income. That over the last, roughly I've got over here 1975 to 2016, over this period, and this is true even if you extend the next few years of data, the fraction of the GDP that goes to workers as income is falling in all wealthy, rich countries. And also in upper middle income countries it is falling. Actually even in lower middle income countries, but not as sharply. So the workers' share is diminishing, and you can very easily see the reason for this. It is just that the machines are coming in, they are displacing workers. Artificial intelligence and robotics are coming in, displacing menial labor. So the income of the workers is going down. I have over here a footnote that if this continues, there are people who worry that the workers' income is going to go smaller and smaller, to which I have one important point, that if work becomes very little, all the work is being done by machines, that would not have been a tragedy if labor being displaced did not mean that workers' income is gone. Every income, if it begins to accrue to those who own the machines, of course it will be a tragedy. But we will have to think of workers retaining a share of their income. Even though their work is going away, everything must not become the income of the person who owns the machine, person who has the intellectual property on the machine. Workers should have a right to that, and we have to think of novel ways like we did for the Industrial Revolution for this. There's another thing that is happening with the technology. I've written about it. What is special about today's technological advances? It is labor-saving technology like all previous technological advances. But there's another kind of advance taking place which is very special to the digital technology, which is, I call it a labor linking technology that links up labor in faraway places. So you can be a consumer in New York, but the person doing the labor for your product is sitting in Bangalore or in Manila or in Johannesburg and working. This is, of course, the offshoring of work that is taking place, made possible by digital technology. This is growing in leaps and bounds, which for relatively developing countries, emerging economies with lower wages is an opportunity for a while, because as the world links up, your workers can begin to do that work. But after some time that's going to go, because as your workers reach those standards, China is already feeling the pressure, wages have risen. India is still at a level where I feel for the next 5 years, 10 years, we can take great advantage of the labor linking technology, employing our workers. But ultimately, we are going to feel the strain as well, and we have to think of this collectively as to what we can do about this. There is a lot of talk that there is going to be de-globalization, that workers working for different places, countries will put stops to that. We have seen in the United States big nationalistic movements saying that let's stop this. My own hunch is globalization will continue, and for the following reason. Any rich country that says we will not use this cheap labor available through digital technology, that country will lose out on its ultimate product, because then it will be using more expensive labor. So on the final product, other countries which use the cheap labor will outcompete these countries. So if Germany says, no, we are going to use labor from wherever it's cheaper using digital technology, United States says, no, we will not. In the final product, Germany is going to outcompete the United States. This pressure will mean either countries will catch on that we can't afford to close our barriers, walls around our country, and I think that they are already catching on. So globalization is a march that is going to continue. Globalization, there are many people who criticize globalization. To me, globalization is a bit like gravity. No one individually causes it. It's hundreds and thousands of people doing little bits of work is leading to globalization. If you get angry about gravity pulling you down, it's a pointless anger. You'll be wasting your time getting angry about it. It's a natural process. Likewise, globalization is virtually a natural process. We have to live with it. We have to learn to intelligently handle it, and that's the challenge that is ahead of us. So, I want to now step back into the theoretical part and tell you about the new ways of doing theoretical thinking, which I was telling you during the Industrial Revolution happens. What should we do now? Here, I'm not going to offer a new theory. I'll give you some hints of it because I feel that's an agenda where the best minds have to come together. And I will just illustrate with historical examples of the kind of problem that we have to take on. Any discipline has explicit assumptions that we write down as assumptions, and assumptions that are so hardwired in the thinking of the professionals that they are not even aware that they are making use of that assumption. Those are the dangerous assumptions. And really innovative theorizing, research, is where you begin to question those assumptions, which are so hardwired that economists are not even aware that they are making use of it. Let me give you one example of that and tell you. How does the market work? If you ask economists, they'll tell you the assumptions or the axioms you need for the market to function well. You need people to have rational preferences. And there are actually axioms for that. If you prefer apple to orange and if you prefer orange to pear, then you must prefer apple to pear. That's called transitivity. We write down these kinds of things as axioms. And then these axioms that we write explicitly, we check them, we analyze them, that they are correct, and we think that that's how the economy runs. But there are many other axioms that we make use of, which we don't even write down. For trade and exchange to take place, you need those technical assumptions. Diminishing returns to scale, transitivity, but you also need another assumption which no economist will write down explicitly as an assumption. The ability to talk and communicate with one another. No economics books have an axiom says people can talk. That's taken for granted. But how people talk, how people communicate can begin to change. And in the age of social media and digital technology, that is beginning to change. And that can begin to change the quality of human interaction. These hidden assumptions of the discipline, which Karl Polanyi had written about a long time ago, the sociologist Mark Granovetter has written, that you have to recognize that economics is a discipline embedded in sociology, in culture, in politics. To understand that embedding better is crucial for us to be able to decide how to regulate the market and how to do better. One example from history I must give you of a hidden assumption that a person is unaware of. And here I want to stress this because some of the biggest breakthroughs here come not from others of the profession, but outsiders staring at the discipline and saying that, look, there's something wrong, because they have the outsider's objectivity. The biggest example of this goes to geometry. Euclid, 300 BC, writes up geometry, which we've all done in school, axioms and theorems. So Euclid decided that every assumption he will write down explicitly as an axiom. So there should be no ambiguity. Whatever assumption he's making is written down as an axiom. This is a line, this is a straight line, this is an angle, all these are axioms. And then given these axioms, he's proving theorems. There was at least one axiom that Euclid was using. Euclid didn't even realize Euclid was using. That all this geometry was being done, Euclid assumed, on a flat surface. That was never written down as an axiom, that we are doing all this on a flat surface. So if you took the lessons of geometry, Euclidean geometry, and applied it to the world as it is today, and used those mathematical calculations for fast travel by planes, there would be accidents taking place. Because the world's surface is not flat. It is spherical, roughly spherical. And Euclidean geometry would not apply here. Euclid was not aware of that. That was actually discovered by a lawyer, a German lawyer, Karl Ferdinand Schweikart, realized that there was an assumption that Euclid had used, which Euclid had not realized. And actually, before that, there's another example of a poet, Omar Khayyam, it is now known, had sensed that there was an assumption Euclid was using. Omar Khayyam didn't get to formalizing it, but had a sense, and it's recorded now, that Euclid was using an assumption without realizing. In the case of Schweikart, Schweikart realized and took it to a mathematician, Gauss, and told him, and then they developed non-Euclidean geometry. That was a big breakthrough, and modern planes flying across the world all uses a geometry which is for a spherical surface, not for a flat surface, rightly so. Likewise, I think it's a time in economics to look into some of the deepest assumptions that we make, and I will give you one or two examples from economics. One, I'm going to explain again with a picture. There's a little bit of analysis, and I won't give you the analysis. This picture I will explain in a moment. Usually in economics, we write down the market for, say, cars, market for, I don't know, market for water bottles. The theory goes back to 1838, the writing of Cournot, Augustin Cournot, wrote about how markets function and how prices get formed. If there are 100 manufacturers of cars, they will compete with each other. The 100 manufacturers are competing with one another, and out of that competition, prices will be formed. This was pioneering work done by Augustin Cournot in 1838. And you can see how pioneering it was, that the greatness of the work was not recognized then, recognized much later. Now, that became for economists the standard mode of analysis. If there are 100 manufacturers of cars, we call that an oligopoly. 100 people producing, you know how the pricing will take place using Cournot's analysis. And that had very big implications for practical policy making. American antitrust law, which begins with the Sherman Act in 1890. The Sherman Act is founded, a lot of it, on Cournot type view of how prices get formed. But think of how the modern world has changed, and the industries are changing. Now, in the olden days, if you had 100 firms manufacturing cars, it would be each firm manufacturing a car. Now, when you have 100 firms in the manufacturing cars, there's one firm manufacturing all the wheels, one firm manufacturing all the gears, one firm manufacturing all the, I don't know enough parts of the cars to continue with this, but there are different parts of the cars. One doing that. One, I'm exaggerating, but it will be a few of them become specialized in wheel manufacturing, few specialized in gear manufacturing. Then you put them together. So the nature of the industry is very different. The 100 manufacturers of cars are not 100 firms producing cars, but one or two producing gears, one or two producing wheels, and the car is coming out. So the 100 are very differently composed, and I call this a vertically serrated industry. What you get is something very interesting. This is for people with an economics background. If you draw a demand curve, the monopoly equilibrium sits in the middle over there, where price is quite high and production is restricted. As more and more firms come into competition, that monopoly equilibrium moves to lower prices, more goods being produced. So if you have more and more firms producing the car, you move towards a competitive equilibrium. But if the model has changed so that you have now a supply chain system, more and more firms are producing cars, but not that they are producing the full car, but different parts of it. As you get more and more cars, manufacturers coming in, actually the equilibrium begins to move in the other direction. Prices tend to go higher, and the production is actually cut back unless there is price discrimination. So a very different conclusion you reach, and you have to think of policy making in a very, very different way. Let me give you one more example, which is changing the nature of the market. In the olden days, starting from Adam Smith, that I mentioned just a while ago, it was believed that this is how the market works. There are lots of buyers, there are lots of sellers, and there is an invisible hand of the market. It's not quite anyone who's saying you trade with this person, you trade with this person, no. That's happening automatically. Lots of buyers coming to the marketplace, lots of sellers coming, they are walking around meeting one another and trading. the invisible hand of the market is actually a non-existent imaginary creation. But think of the modern digital platform, Amazon. Lots of buyers, lots of sellers, but the invisible hand is not an invisible hand. It is actually a big profit-making firm. That is the invisible hand. The invisible hand is suddenly a profit-making entity that is bringing the two sides together. It can have a dramatic effect, which our analysis does not allow, because we are hardwired into thinking of the market, the hand of the market is an invisible automatic hand. And here, we have to think of policies which will sound very radical right now, but we have to put our minds to it. You know, the central banks in many countries, Bank of England when it was being founded in 1694, even the Reserve Bank of India in the early 20th century, were private bodies. People could make profits out of it. After some time it was realized that this is one entity, you can't make it a profit-making body, because for anyone to survive in the modern economy, you have to have money. So the central bank is a gatekeeper of the modern economy. That can't be left in a private hand. That has to be, you don't even want the government to get full control of it, but a non-profit, specially designed autonomous body. And I feel some of the biggest platforms, you will have to think along those terms. And when you begin to think along, that will appear very, very radical, but it is a matter to which we have to put our minds to it. And not for a moment am I saying take away the profit motive, because I do believe that the profit motive is very important, so you need lots of firms with the profit motive primarily, but you can't have the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India being a profit maximizing entity that blocks anyone's entry and exit. You have to get into these kinds of domains and think about policy. Where are we going and what will the future look like? I'm going to speculate a little bit. I feel as the demand for labor falls and we are moving into the next phase, it's going to be a challenge for different countries. There will be new winners and new losers. And our debate is so polarized today. You take any country, including India. Some people will say it's a sure winner. Some people will say the way we are going, it's a sure loser. The truth is somewhere in between, as always. And if you also analyze India carefully now, in some ways it is doing well, in some ways it is doing very badly. And it is a combination. One of the things you have to do is have that space for clarity, getting all the data, getting all the numbers, looking at it, and then analyzing where we will go. Now, I believe personally that the two sectors that are going to be dominant in the world, and countries that take up positions on that, will be the big players. Education, creative education, because menial labor is going to be taken over. So when you nurture creative education, those countries will be in the front line. The other thing is, I feel the health sector will grow and grow and grow. So for part of the GDP, as I was saying earlier, large part of the GDP is going to be better health, because there the scope for growth is huge. You can make bigger and bigger strides. These two sectors are going to play a big role, and before I come to that, I want to just give you the current growth picture across country to show you, including India, how it's easy to be misled one way or the other. Focus for a moment on the year 2021. This is the latest World Bank data I have taken, which is roughly the data you're getting out of India, with some minor change, and even other countries. It's World Bank usually takes the country's data and will make minor changes, so very close to the country data. 2021. I took a sample of 10 countries, fairly randomly. The fastest growing country in this 10 is India, 8.7% growth. But, and over here there are some people who will treat this as the final result, that India is right on top of the world. It is not. It's a mixed bag because of the following reason. India's growth was very high in 2021 because the growth was very low in the previous year. So when you fall in and then you growth is from wherever you are, how you climb up. So if you fall into a pit when you're climbing up, you're getting a huge growth, but it is not a net growth. If you take the 2 years together, you get into the column which is green, 2020-2021. India's annual growth drops over the 2-year period because it's 1 year is very negative growth, the other year is positive growth. But India's not the bottom of this chart, neither the top of this chart. It's somewhere in the middle. If you bring in the year 2022, which is a forecast, again India is getting a very high forecast of growth. India climbs up a little bit more. So the picture is a mixed bag. You can't take that 1 year growth and treat it as the story told. Nor when you pull in the data, will India be at the bottom, India somewhere in between. I believe that right now we are at a juncture where we have to think in terms of the creative process and going forward. If I take another 4 or 5 minutes, is that all right? Yeah, okay. Again, I do a little bit of historical examples of countries which have been neck to neck with other countries, and then comes out what causes it. If you go to the 1920s, 1910, 1920s, you will get articles being written in Western newspapers about the country that is going to come out on top is Argentina. Not United States, but Argentina is going to be the richest country in roughly 1915, even up to 1920. Argentina is among the top 10 richest countries in the world. France and Germany are behind Argentina, and it is expected that Argentina will become the dominant country. From 1930, Argentina begins to bungle its policies, and over a 10-15 year period, Argentina has crashed. The United States has overtaken Argentina in a big way. After that, no one is speculating that Argentina will catch up. Things may change, again, 40 years down the road, but the story is done. What happened? It's a lot of speculation going back into history. One is, Argentina became a country of hyper-nationalism. There was a strident rise of that. It is blocking of talent coming into the country. Tariffs were being raised on goods crazily. It was becoming a closed economy over a short period. Did huge damage to Argentina. But I think there was another damage being done, which is more America doing this right. It is education. United States, one talks of United States as a hard power, but I feel the real power of United States is the soft power. The investment that the US did on education, top universities, space for universities to do creative research, that went, I think that period of US nurturing it gave it the long run strength, which made United States overtake Argentina. A bit of a similar story with South Korea. If you go back to 1960, South Korea's per capita income is slightly higher than India's. It's being treated as a basket case, South Korea, and there are American documents saying this country will remain eternally poor. We will just have to provide it with minimum support, etc. That changed, it began to grow. What caused it? Again, there are many factors. It's foolish to say that you're pinning it down, but one thing which we know has happened in recent times, the investment in education, creative education in South Korea is among the world's leaders. If you take one particular interesting data, in the year 2019, and it's roughly the same even now, the number of intellectual patents being taken out for 1 million population, 3,319 patents per 1 million population, South Korea is taking out. It's the world leader. The next is Japan, 1,943. So South Korea, 3,319. Next is Japan, 1,943. After that is USA, Germany, China, clustering below that. So intellectual property being generated in South Korea is very high. Another thing we do know that school teachers in South Korea often earn incomes like rock stars in many Western countries. Because school teachers are in such demand because of this rush for education. A little bit of it is being overdone, I think. I'm told about the cramming courses and all that, but education is playing a major role. And in per capita income terms, it is likely that over the next few years, South Korea is going to overtake Japan, which would have been unthinkable 20, 30 years ago. But the primary driver, once again, is education that has brought South Korea to this stage. Now, for a country like India, the research space, the creative workspace is very important, from school education to universities, to creating a space where you will do innovative thinking. A lot is going to depend on that, whether we do that well, but you have to realize many countries are realizing and doing that well. Another thing I personally believe could play a very major role, if a country becomes a hub for global education, if people begin to come here for education, I've written several times for that. India has a great potential for that. where it becomes a global hub and begins to attract students. Surprisingly, I mean, even 20, 25 years ago, China was nowhere on the scene on this, but China is beginning to attract students, medical students coming from all over the world going to China. This is going to create a bigger opportunity for the country to do better, but China has very risky politics that can undo the nation altogether with its politics. Vietnam is playing the game very well, South Korea is playing the game very well. It is an uncertain terrain that we are going into. But I will just end in a line. I have not given you sort of concrete measures that this is the policy you follow, this is the new kind of theorizing you do. But I know that we are at a juncture which is a bit of a make or break juncture for the whole world. And there is one more thing where India is a small player, is you need better global agreements and conventions where the world can work together, because we are becoming a globalized world in terms of the economy. But our politics is balkanized completely. I take decision for my people, my region, you take decision for your people, your region. You need a greater space for that. But if we bring our minds together, and India had played a very major role, I have to say, right from the start. In the early days, I used to write that when I went to international, I used to teach in Delhi, and when I would go to international conferences, the dominant players there would be from America, from Europe, but the one developing country from where you did not feel left out was India. There would always be a critical presence of Indians. India did very poorly in terms of basic literacy. We did not do well right from the start of independence, but higher education we were doing extremely well, with the big presence of Indians in international meets. These are terrains that we have to keep on nurturing and growing, and the space for ideas, space for discussion is important. Trustworthiness, the topics are very large. There are from laboratory tests to cross-country studies, that groups that have greater trust among themselves. There are beautiful studies done in Israel, where if you have a group doing with a lot of trust, and these are in controlled laboratories, in the lab where you're actually paying them, those groups begin to do better if they have trust among one another. So these are qualities which go step outside of economics. But if we bring our minds together, and this is not just a question of intuition and gut feeling, you will have to think best, bring your best intellectual powers to the problem, and there's a scope for doing much better, and we should try to do much better, not just for our nation and per capita income, but because we want to spread the better message across the world. Thank you very much.
I think you will all agree that Kaushik has covered a vast space, and it's provided you a kind of an overview of the development in this area, in economics and so on. And it was really a treat in many ways. And I would say that his last observations, that education is the most important one, is something we can all agree. But particularly important there was that you must give creative education and space for creativity. And space for creativity, I think, requires that you have a very pluralistic society, that you have an ability to think out of the box, that you are not wedded to some ideological straitjackets, that you cannot think outside of it. And all these things, I think India can be very proud of having had this. And I'm slightly using the past tense, because I'm not so sure that we are not moving towards a direction in which such out-of-the-box thinking would not be tolerated. When I saw a chart of Kaushik like this, I thought that maybe he will be arrested and prosecuted for sedition. But since this is a private audience, I think you need not worry, Kaushik. But I do think that, yes, we need to have very creative atmosphere, a society in which we can all do this. And I think what is interesting, Kaushik didn't point out in the chart, is Bangladesh is the highest growth from 20 to 22 and is doing quite well. So it is indeed a lesson for us to learn from that also. But I think what other things Kaushik says is that, which is very interesting, is that even when you have 100 different firms, it is really so fragmented and vertically integrated that you have only 2 or 3 guys in that who control the entire market and the prices here. And that you should not be happy that yes, there are 100 firms and there is no need to do this. But unfortunately, in our society, we tend to do is immediately go for regulation. And the regulation, most regulatory boards, how to constitute regulatory commissions, are written by IAS officers. And they describe the requirements for appointing the chairman such that only a retired IAS officer can qualify. Because I remember when I was member of the Planning Commission, we had to appoint the chairman of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. And the board was packed with mostly IAS guys, and they would refuse to even interview an IAS guy. I said, how can I do this? I won't not agree to this, appointing someone without that. And they would never allow me to look anyone outside the thing, because it is not really not a part of the commission specified. The law doesn't require that as this. So I think we need to really reform how we constitute regulatory commissions, because that is completely very important that we have on really good regulators. I'm not saying that all IAS officers have made very bad regulatory chairmen, but nonetheless, I think we need to bring in some fresh blood from outside in this system. But I think the main point that Kaushik made is really that yes, India has scope and opportunity to do well, and let us hope so that this optimism is fulfilled and that we don't really get trapped into something else. Thank you, Kaushik. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. On behalf of all faculty members and staff of GIDR, I am happy to be standing here to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you very much to be a part of this session. Let me first begin by thanking Professor Kaushik Basu for a very insightful and a fascinating lecture, sir. We as students of economics have been reading your work. I think we would have at least read most of your articles. In addition, we have with great pleasure have been listening to your interviews, reading your commentaries and views on various issues, and that too quite recently. So thank you very much for all the insights that you have given today and in the past. However, this time it was a real honor and privilege to listen to you just up so close. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of us. I wish to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Parik for supporting us, for being part of us, and for chairing the session. I thank you from the deepest of my heart, sir. I take this opportunity to thank Professor Visaria, without whom I think this event wouldn't have been possible. Thank you much for being an inspiration to all of us. I wish to convey my gratitude to all the members of governing board of Gujarat for GIDR, that is Gujarat Institute of Development Research. Thank you very much. event like this could not be managed without the proper planning and execution. In this regard, I would like to extend my special thanks to my director, Professor R. Parthasarathy, for having a bird's eye view on a very minute detail. Thank you very much, sir, for supporting all of us. Our sincere gratitude goes out for all the friends of GIDR who are here and all those who could not make it but have extended their wishes to us. Thank you all, and it's because of you that we have all this encouragement and motivation to organize this event. We have amongst us the representatives from various government departments. There are people from all walks of life, sir, if I may say. There are people from the government, from the universities, there are lawyers, there are journalists, advocates, there are, I think, researchers, there are doctors, engineers, and students. So, thank you all for being part of us. Special thanks to our friends from the press who have covered this event. Special mention to Dhaval Bhai for videographing, and AMA for providing us with the premises as well as the equipments and other materials. We thank each one of you for making this day a memorable one. But I would fail to do my duty if I do not thank my own colleagues. There have been a sense of support, though we are a very small organization with a very small team, but all my colleagues have been a great support. So thank you all. I'm not going to name you, but you know each one of you, I